I think that's what.
Well,
Stacy's working
I'm
for.
sorry, yep.
I know
So,
the direction she needs for the next meeting.
yes, so we have our slate list here. And we'd asked everybody to submit their two candidates to be considered for appointment to this committee. There were some additional applicants who just on their own submitted via online. A couple can't, well, they can't be considered unless you take off their spouses, which are already being considered. So if anybody wants to reconsider their selection, otherwise we can move forward with what you initially proposed.
If they could.
Just one question related to the chair appointment consideration. I know that the council will vote for that position. Is there expectation that other names could be introduced for consideration?
I would assume so. The only reason I put David and as the mayor had that privilege to select a chair, I know he has been on this once before.
Okay.
So it was more
According
from
to
the
the
experience.
Not to get into. I read that the council would make the selection for the chair, not the mayor. If you read it differently, that's, we can have that discussion.
Give me a second. I know Kevin's pulling that one up.
Give me just a minute. Get it pulled up. If I'm incorrect, I'd stand out. So.
That language should be directly from the charter.
Give me that. Pull the charter up. The last line on this particular slide.
It says, the charter says the city council shall select the chair person for the committee.
Did any of the other applicants indicate that they were interested?
No, ma'am.
So at this point, we can just throw names in the hat and the council decides
Okay.
who,
Yes, sir.
is that a decision? We don't make that tonight, do we?
Well, if I'm bringing this forward to the June 20th, I mean, I can bring it forward as a regular agenda item for further discussion rather than
Okay.
put it on consent.
I'm supportive of David Coe, given his experience before. And so that I know all of the other candidates, but to me, that makes the most obvious selection to me.
My thought, I was just asking if there was the opportunity to introduce other names into that particular position, since the council was going to make that appointment rather than it coming from our two. That was all I was focused on. All the other applicants that have put in there were additional. So that wouldn't necessarily be the pool that I would recommend that we choose from and solely choose from. I was looking elsewhere, thinking of another name, and I have not had the opportunity to talk to that individual yet. So all I'm asking is the introduction of potentially another name by the June 20th date.
That's fine. Does that work with your time schedule?
It does. I'll just put
Okay.
it on the regular agenda. So there
I'm
can be
certainly not going
discussion.
to exclude anyone.
Can I ask a
Sure.
question?
Mhm.
I'm looking at the charter here, section 2.01 says, the council shall consist of 6 members. Mayor counts as a. So does that mean well, I understand that. Does that mean that he can, I'm just trying to answer the question, David's question from earlier. Does that mean that the mayor can also, when it says up there, the city council shall appoint.
Well,
Does that mean the city council including the mayor or the city?
Yeah, no,
council and then people?
actually, the charter has this section 920 of the charter has a specific provision regarding the appointment of the charter review committee. And it expressly says that up to at least 2 members nominated by the mayor are included in that group.
At least 2.
At least 2. Yeah, I will say, I have been, Pete and I, of course, have been involved probably in the last 3 charter reviews. And I will tell you, we've had different sizes of committees. I will tell you, getting much larger than what's called for, although by charter, you could appoint more. We actually did with the previous review. I can't remember if it was the last one, the one prior. And frankly, you get more than this number as a committee drafting a new document like this. It just from my vantage point of trying to shepherd that committee into decisions, it starts to get pretty unwieldy. And so, we had a similar number with with the redistricting committee. And I think, with the alternates, whatnot in that one, which were there, I think that we were able to manage that process reasonably well with that size of a group. And so I would just encourage you to stick to the 2, plus your chair for each one of you. And, I mean, kind of for a selfish reason, just because it's easier for us to help manage the process that way. And also makes it a little easier to make sure we've got quorum when we meet.
And so if there's anybody that we've talked to that we'd like to have considered for the chair position, do they need to submit their application before a certain date?
They would need to submit their application definitely before June 20th, yes.
Okay.
Can we agree by the end of the week? Or if there's somebody that may be interested, that they get their application in by the end of the week, so they finish the process of the background check for Stacy?
I would say probably by the end of next week, if you feel so inclined. This is a real important process. I've been through it. I was on a charter review committee, and I believe it really takes somebody to serve as the chair of this committee who knows what's going on, who has probably, I would say, intimate knowledge of how city government works. There's plenty of friends out there. I didn't nominate friends. I nominated the best qualified people that I thought would help represent our city to get us where we need to be. This next to P&Z and ZBA, this is probably one of the most important things that our city will do. So I did not take it lightly when I nominated David to fill this position. I suppose that if you have somebody you want to consider, we can do that. But as I read it, each council member was able to nominate 2 people. And then and the mayor was at least 2. So we're not making the committee larger. That's not going to be beneficial. You won't be able to get anything done.
So Mayor, just as a point of clarification, the role of the chair is simply to facilitate the meetings. They're not necessarily viewed as a subject matter expert on the charter itself, or
And that's why you'll have the city attorney present
right.
at those meetings.
So someone who's skilled or adept in procedure, keeping the meeting on track, that would be part of city attorney's role as well. Administrative role around the meetings themselves, but not necessarily someone who is influencing policy or outcomes.
I'm sure the chair could probably give his input just like any other representative should, but their goal is not to direct their own policy there. Their goal,
Right.
primary goal is to facilitate the meeting and keep everybody on track.
Right, okay, that's what I wanted to make sure was clear.
We also have historically worked with the chair to help set the agenda for each of the meetings. Typically, the first couple, 2-3 meetings will be spent actually going through different articles. Usually we'll just go straight in a row, to discuss cleanup items and anything that other members wanted to try to do it in a kind of an organized, logical fashion. Get some of the cleanup stuff kind of everybody agreed to on paper, and then let's get into more of the harder issues, which are, have been, many of which are on that list that you've been provided, and get into more discussions of that, and ultimately work with the chair in developing the final report based on the different recommendations from the committee. Again, it's not I think pretty well how you describe facilitate, but yes, the chair does have the ability to, provide their input and vote just like any other member.
Anything else on that?
So the takeaway is that we have until the end of next week to provide additional names if we so choose.
I think that was the general
Additional names.
consensus.
Let me be clear, additional names for the chairmanship. I want to be clear that it was my only focus was on the chairmanship.
Sure.
Not any more representatives per district, but only the chair.
And Councilman, I think I heard it's not just submitting the name, but getting that person to submit their application.
That is correct. Yes, yes. Fair, Kevin. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Next up is A3, review the results of the 2023 citywide single-family property assessment by master plan.
Good afternoon, Council, Mayor, and everyone. I am Leo Bonanno. I'm the Director of Neighborhood Services. And today you're going to hear from this lady beside me, Amy Matthews. She's going to present the results of the single-family housing analysis or assessment survey that their firm performed for us this year. This assessment takes place periodically throughout the city. It's been happening for at least from what I understand, since 2006, and perhaps even before then. So every couple of years, perhaps 2 or 3 years, a new assessment was done and brought to the council and discussed. And then, of course, staff can use the assessment in our various duties. So in the item on your agenda that follows, the presentation that comes from code enforcement, you'll hear me talk a little bit more about how this will be used by code enforcement and, of course, other staff. But for now, I'm just here to introduce Ms. Matthews and turn it over to her. And I'll be here, of course, too, if anyone has questions. But I'll let you take it. Sure.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Can y'all hear me? You seem like you're louder.
I don't see my louder.
Good evening, council members and mayor. I'm Amy Matthews. I'm a part of the team, the assessment team from Master Plan. We work to complete a visual assessment of all the single family dwellings in Farmers Branch. So that would not just be single family attached. It would include anything that's a single family dwelling, including townhomes and duplexes. So the assessment analyzed each home based on a series of criteria developed by the code enforcement department. I'm sure the ones that have been used in the past. So here is the assessment really started off on March 8th when we kind of kicked it off. We divided up into teams. There are usually always 2 people to a team, so we can kind of help each other driving around, unless sometimes there might be one person out doing it on their own. So we started the survey, and that took a few weeks. We put that information into Excel tables. And then, of course, with the help of GIS, we got it into mapping. And I know that was in your packet. It's in the presentation. It shows the map. And then we had our draft report and presentation. And now here we are with our final deliverables and presentation to council, which is obviously not 5/16, but here we are doing it today. All right, our findings. So we have this graph, but really what it comes down to is we looked at 12 different criteria. I'm just going to name some of the main ones you would think of, like looking at roof and wall, fence, window and door conditions. So all of those landscaping, not necessarily how pretty landscaping is, just like the overall condition of landscaping. The visibility of address numbers, obviously that's important for fire and police. And like the placement of trash cars, whether it's behind the front of the house. So we looked at those criteria. There was the scoring of 1 through 4. So that's how you get these numbers. With most of the subjects were 1 through 4, with 4 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. And sometimes you might have a 0 if it's a empty lot, you know, or if it's been, there were a few lots that had just been, they had just had demolition. And so obviously they're going to have new homes built on them. So most of the homes, like over 90%, fell within the higher grades, which are green. The homes that were graded at the other end of the range, so the ones maybe that were in orange or red, are just homes that need either multiple smaller projects. They might need some, you know, roof patching. They might have some windows. I know I have like those older metal windows are starting to like kind of separate from my house when it's cold outside. You know, actually had some ice on the inside of my house during that last ice storm. And then we replaced some of them too. And of course, those were great. So now we need to replace the rest of them. But so those are homes that either had a few smaller repairs, or they might just have one major repair. They might need their entire roof replaced. There are some places where obviously flat work, we know that the land settles around here. You know, there's places where it looks like it would be hard to get onto the driveway or even to get into the garage, you know, some of those when things have settled. And so the remaining 1.1% were either vacant or not enough information. So either 90 minus the 1, and then, I mean, 90%, like I said, was higher, and then 1% would maybe be vacant, and then in between were the ones that needed some help. And so we're going to start with District 1. District 1 has a really diverse housing stock, with about 1/3 of the newer homes that are going in Mercer Crossing are there, and the rest being more established homes near the city center. So like more in the, obviously the homes that would have been built around the establishment of the city and through time. So in District 2, we have the highest number of single family residents. There were 2 that were really high. 2 and 5 had the most, with the most of them located in established neighborhoods. So when you have established neighborhoods, and even like the one I live in, you know, you have, there's every kind of condition in between. So these subdivisions are made up of mostly small 2-bedroom homes on smaller lots. And the area is also seeing some redevelopment though on Mountain View Drive, Wilmington, Harrisburg, and Holbrook. And I do believe there were definitely some lots in this area that had either just recently been redeveloped or maybe they're being demolished and about to be redeveloped. So you see in areas that are more, that have been, I hate to say older neighborhoods, but more established neighborhoods, you often see people doing redevelopment. All right, District 3, this is the smallest district, as you can see. Obviously, we have the newer development. We have all the new homes over on the west side, and then we have more of an established neighborhood on the east side. So majority of these homes are, like I said, just on the east side were more established, and on the west side were brand new. So you also see the large amount of redevelopment here also, particularly in the neighborhoods east of Tom Fields Road. And in District 4, this is a district that is mostly has larger lots. Like we were talking earlier, how some of the homes had the smaller lots, the 2-bedrooms. I mean, that was pretty common after World War II and then up for quite a while. And then more recently, we're obviously seeing with the cost of land going up and just everything, we're seeing a lot of these larger lots with larger homes. So 3+ bedrooms, some even larger. And since most of these are new homes, they obviously don't have a lot of major repairs required at this time. And then finally, we have 5, District 5, which has a diverse housing type. We have the large lots around Brookhaven Golf Course, and then also the townhome developments in that area too. And then we have the smaller single family lots on the southern portion. So, and you can see that's where you have some of the, those are the more established homes. So anywhere you're gonna have a neighborhood that's been around for a while, that's when you're gonna see varying conditions, of course. So some of our miscellaneous findings, our District 1 had the largest number of garage conversions. And when we went around, if we saw like blatantly that the garage, well, some of them had been just redone to match the house perfectly. You know, they redid that, they added all new windows. You can tell we would count that one as a conversion. If there was no more, if there was a window there, even if it wasn't even if it wasn't all new in the front, if it had a window there, if it didn't have the pool, we'd consider that a conversion. Some of them, they still had that garage door there, and they might even had like a plant parked in front, but they still had a driveway. They still had the garage door. So we did not consider those conversions. So we did this all visually. So I'm sure some of those ones that we didn't count as conversion might be a conversion. We just didn't have any proof, and so we weren't going to guess. In District 2, we had the highest number of grades, kind of smack in the middle, 2.5 to 2.75. The big issues are roof, of course, like anywhere, and then windows. Like I said, sometimes you can just tell the windows and even the doors are just the older metal style, and they start to pull away from the building a little. Sometimes you might even see cracks in the brick, but you can tell those are just like regular. I mean, they're not necessarily a foundation. Obviously, I can't tell by looking at it if it's a foundation crack, but there's, you might see some of those elsewhere. And obviously there's a lot of reinvestment going on in the southwestern section of District 2. District 3 has the most redevelopment and new development, Mercer Crossing. District 4 had the highest overall scores, the main issue coming from landscaping. And some of that, like I said, it wasn't necessarily how nice it was. It might be patches of missing landscaping, sometimes you have tree roots that grow up, or it might be mostly would be probably missing landscaping, or and especially in areas around the house. You can see the house, obviously they're all built with some kind of landscaping around the bottom of the brick, usually, that you do those plantings, and those might all be gone. And those are obviously important because they help keep moisture so the soil doesn't pull away from the house. I mean, that's one reason why you do those plantings right next to the buildings. And then in District 5, with the most pronounced mix of housing, with the large quantities of large and single and smaller lots in the townhomes. So that's the one with the golf course. A lot of golf course communities have the larger lots, and then they have townhomes. They have a variety of housing, so a variety of people can live by the golf course. And so this is just back to the map, and I can go over the conclusions. Farmers Branch has a wide variety of housing options. It really makes it helpful for different demographics. I mean, a lot of the suburbs in North Texas, have had in the past a large 30 to 40-year-old population. Now, obviously, there's going to be more people over retirement age. There's so many people moving to the whole area in need of housing. It's really important and good for you all to have such a diverse housing stock, because you all are like a first tier city or suburb out of Dallas. You're gonna have more expansion, obviously, this land, these developments that you're building right now. And like I said, currently, in my experience as a planner, I've worked in few cities. A lot of the stuff is now just these large lot single family development. So it's good that you have some diversity and that you're willing to look at that. And that's just going to keep helping people move here. And then also another thing, it's just, I talked about, Leo, how this is just a snapshot of that time and day that we went and took those, we went and saw those houses. Maybe somebody's trash can was out front and it shouldn't be. Maybe there are some extra weeds. Maybe they had just, something. So it's not anything that reflect on a certain person. It's just on the home and the condition at that time. So I know on my experience as a homeowner, I've had code enforcement, ask me to put my boxes away, put in recycling after Christmas and stuff. I mean, it happens to everybody. So it's not trying to be a reflection on any certain person or neighborhood. It really is just kind of showing a snapshot and trying to help keep you all the great city that you are. And then don't forget, the vast majority of the housing stock, over 90%, was all really good. I mean, I've worked in other cities where they have some programs like this where they help. But they come in, I know Leo said, you know, you come and help some property. Sometimes if they need some help with things, and it's great to have such a proactive code enforcement, I think, and y'all taking the time to do this. I think it'll help you a lot. In my experience of cities who do this are the ones that stay on top of things and are the ones that people want to be in. So that really concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Please. I know when I was on council, we were reported to have between 9,000 and 10,000 single family homes. And you're referencing 8,000. So I'm just wondering,
Oh,
was there any area that was excluded from the survey?
no.
No, our list came,
From the county, correct?
yeah, yes, we got our list of single family homes directly from DCAT,
Okay.
7,997. And that list was taken from the county and given directly to these folks.
Okay. And then realize that some of I trust that you all are professionals in what you do, but I gotta believe that some of this is a little subjective in terms of looking at a house
Sure.
and assessing, you know, what we see from the outside,
Sure.
high grass and weeds, maybe no yard, all dirt. Automobiles being worked on,
Mhm.
things of that nature. So all that was taken into account and I guess scored accordingly.
Yes, I mean, but I would agree that there's definitely a subjective nature of something like this. Especially since more than one person was working on it, you know, we all met, of course. I mean, we all in the same office, we met and discussed things, but you're right. Some things might not be seen as the same. I mean, you know, it might not be the same level of, somebody might see a roof in one condition and think that's fine. And somebody else might think, oh, if that was my roof, I would want to patch that. So you're correct. There's definitely going to be some of that. But yes, we all sat down and we tried to look at the same things. And we did take into consideration, like if somebody was if there's a car parked there and we couldn't tell it was being worked on or something, that's fine. If you could tell maybe it's up on blocks, then it might be considered a nuisance. I mean, so yes, but there's definitely going to be some subjectivity.
Okay. Because when I looked at your report here and then was trying to draw some correlation to code enforcement issues, which we'll be talking about next, I was really trying to say, okay, what really stands out? Where are problems,
Sure.
if you will? And then we just have the overall score to go on.
Oh, okay.
It's not telling me that in one particular district, let's say, we're having problems with driveways and walkways.
Okay.
You know, a high number of that versus fences or landscaping or one of the other criteria.
I can help with that. Master plan actually provided the data on every home that they examined.
Okay.
So we literally have the scores and how they break down for every home. So the fence score, the driveway score, the nuisance score, we have that for every home that they looked at. It's 96 pages long, which is why we didn't give it to you. But I do have it.
But by you having it, that would be able to help you.
Oh, yes.
In facilitating your job.
Yes, exactly right. And so that'll be, staff, code officer districts do not align with yours. So, one district may have two officers in it, this side and that side, but they can still use the data, the hard data, and be like, okay, well, that street there, we've got some low scores on that street. And it appears that the low scores are all due to fences. So let's make an extra attempt to look at those fences, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So yeah, but we have the hard data on every house.
Good.
So.
All righty. Thank you. All right. Councilman Mayor.
Yes. Ms. Matthews, if I could help or inquire about the scoring.
Yes, sir.
So 11 criteria, 12 criteria, as you pointed out. Several were 1 through 4. Actually, the majority were 1 through 4. There were a couple, 3 or 4 that were 1 and 2s.
Mhm.
And then I believe there was a yes and no.
Yes.
So help me understand the mathematics, if you will. If I'm getting a score from somewhere between 25 and 38, which is, I believe, the top score that you could acquire, how do we come back to the 1 through 4 ratings that we see that equate to the color gradations on the maps that you presented?
Well, I know the converted garages are on that table, but they weren't taken into consideration.
Okay.
So they didn't have one. And then the trash and recycling carts and then the accessory structures, oh yeah, and then the visibility of the number 1 through 2, they were just given, they would have been given like a 1 and a 4. So instead of being 1 through 4 and having 4 different variations, they were either they had them visible or they didn't. So when we put them mathematically in there, then weren't visible would have been a 1, and they did have them were a 4.
Okay.
And the same thing for the trash recycling, they had them behind the house or in front of the house. So yeah, so those were more black and white. Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you for that
You're welcome.
description.
Councilman Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for, this is very intriguing information. It's the first time I've seen it. I'm curious in your, professional opinion or experience, a little bit of the behavior, science behind some of we have some streets, entire streets of 20 or 30 homes that are red, which denotes the more serious concerns, right? And then right behind it might be an entire street that's all green. And I'm just wondering, what have you seen as the rationale or the reasoning why you have streets right next to each other, homes right, lines of homes, not just this home's green, this one's red, but this entire street is red, and the homes that back up to those homes behind it are all green.
Well, what I remember driving around and talking to some of my coworkers were some of it might have honestly stemmed from, it could have all, maybe not all of it, but I'm trying to look down here and see what exactly we called it. The flat work. Honestly, if the flat work was all uneven on a street, there were streets where the sidewalks were, because we didn't look at the sidewalk, obviously, because that's not their property. So the driveway was maybe off and their sidewalk might be off, like, it's not level, there might be cracks and stuff. And that could be based on settling on the main sidewalk or the street. And then those were the houses that often had the gaps into the garages. And then I think some of those things just kind of spirals down. Maybe the fences are maybe not as well kept up because maybe there's some more settling there and landscaping. And then the house, some of it is also, I know just from my experience, your house, like if looks like that, and then your next door neighbors, and then it kind of, just kind of don't notice it because you're on your street and that's what you see when you drive down the street. And it was kind of more like the behavioral, like you're saying. And then the street behind it, people might have just updated it all at the same time or been built at a different time. But I think seeing that behavioral side of it, I think that's what happens is you just kind of come complacent. I remember years ago when my fence blew down, my husband put some of that rickrack, and like our neighbor did too, and ours kind of stayed longer than everybody's. And then finally we got like a notice from code enforcement on, please fix and I feel like sometimes after weather events too, which I'm not saying that's what happened here, but I know that can happen.
Sure.
One street has a flooding problem and the next one doesn't. So there's some of those issues that I think are common in cities. And that when your neighbor cleans up their house and does all this great stuff, that's, my husband wants to start doing it and the next door neighbor does it. So that's one good thing about what y'all do, because you kind of start that whole domino effect.
So Mayor, maybe as some follow-up, and I don't know if this is part of our next discussion, because we are talking about code enforcement, but trailing what you were saying about the individual data will give us more of an idea of what it is that we're looking at here. I'd be very curious to know, is this neighborhood all about fences? Is it all about, inoperable vehicles? What are the characteristics that has turned this entire street red for some reason? Or maybe it's just all unique stuff. I don't know. But I'm very curious to understand a little bit more detail.
You're right. And the table would help with that. And then the only other, I don't think this would make this a huge of a difference, but it can definitely make somewhat of a difference. It's just like the human having somebody go out there and two different people might have done that street. I mean, I know we broke into groups, but we did work on our sections, but we also did help other people because we wanted to get areas done at a time. So that could have a hope. I mean, I would hope and would say, no, it did not have such a great effect as it to be red and green, but some of it could be that coupled with those other explanations.
I would expect to see a little bit more discrepancy between red and orange, but not as far as between red or yellow. Or red and
Yes.
green. Those kinds of small differences is all.
Sure,
Okay.
no,
Thank you.
no, we're.
Councilwoman?
So is there any, and this would be a question for you, do we know about rentals in those areas? Do we know which ones are?
Sorry, that wasn't part of their data or their.
I just didn't know if you had that information.
No, we don't. I mean, code enforcement generally assumes that when we look up a house's record and the owner's mailing address is not that house, that's the general presumption, right? That it's a rental house. That's not always true, but that's the general presumption. But the assessment did not dig into owners or addresses. It was strictly taking a look at things from the road. That's all they did. So.
Councilman Roman?
Yes, I've got a question. So, I know that there was some overlap we worked on it doing a code enforcement suite in my district, in the more established area. And so one of the questions I have is how did that overlap of enforcement suite skew the results, if any?
What I would say is the area of the suite that the officers performed in your district would if the assessment was done today, would improve. Your district would improve because we opened over 1,000 violations and had remarkable success. You know, so many of those people fixed problems voluntarily and learned a lot from the process. So what I would say is if the assessment was done again today, you would see more yellows and greens, perhaps fewer reds and oranges. You'd see a shift in the more positive. Now, it's totally normal. Of course, some people are going to go back to their old ways. We did a sweep and unfortunately not everybody learns from it. So, you know, you do see a bit of that. But I think generally speaking, like I said, you could look at this and then maybe give your district a couple of extra points because the sweep overlapped at this project. And your sweep technically is still ongoing. We still have cases that are open, people working on rooms and things, you know, so some of those cases are still open. So at some point they'll be in compliance and closed, and in theory, those will turn green, right? So.
Okay, yeah, that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Councilman Beard?
I was just gonna ask, and Ben, maybe this is for you, kind of the same thing that Tina was asking. Can we find out, can we commingle data and figure out what percentage of code violations are rental properties? Just to have that.
We can make our best guess. Sometimes it's hard to tell. One of the bigger tells for me is if they have the homestead exemption or not. Rental properties don't qualify for that. So we look for that element as well. And then the mailing address. So putting those two together, it just takes time and hours to merge the data, but that is something we can do.
So, if you have a rental property, don't you have to let the city know?
You're supposed to do that as well.
So we have that data
Correct.
and we can, okay,
There's several ways to apply it, but just to make sure as well.
I'd be interested in seeing
I had actually made some notes and your question was on my notes, which was going to be on the next section. But, all right, any other questions regarding this? So what are our next steps?
Well, you're done, actually, so.
Would say, and
You did a great job. so
thank you. No, thank
You know, obviously.
You can answer all these.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. They did, Master Plan did do an excellent job. They actually, I guess just for the record, they started this project earlier than was asked of them. They finished earlier than was asked of them, and they did remarkable. This is my first assessment in this city. I got here in 2020, but the last assessment was done in 2017. So I was also excited to see how this turned out. And they did a super job. But so what happens next? Excellent question. And we'll touch on it a bit in the next item, but just so you know, as far as code enforcement goes, we will start looking at the hard data. We've already started, I should say, but we'll start applying the data that we've gotten and start honing in on those problems. The officers are going to get reports. We have one massive report of every house in town, right? Well, we're going to break those up and give each officer theirs. And then obviously the officers are going to look at the lower scores first, because those could be health and safety things, right? Might not be, but most likely can be. So we're gonna work with the officers to be like, okay, you're working in this part of your district today. That's okay. But do me a favor and swing by a few reds too over here. Can we do that? And of course, the officers are great. They'll do whatever's needed of them. So as far as code goes, that's where code enforcement's headed. Other departments might use the same information in their own processes too. And so of course, we're going to share it. For example, some of those reds might be prime candidates for demolition. Perhaps we don't go to those people and say, we need you to fix everything. Perhaps Allison's team goes to them and says, you know what, maybe you want to make a change. Maybe we take this house off your hands and we do something different with it. So that's an example too of, okay, that's not a code thing, but other departments have an opportunity to take advantage of this too. So yeah, that's a little bit of the ball getting rolling. Does that answer your question?
Well, it does.
Okay.
And you touched on exactly one of the points that I wanted to bring up is either how do we move reds to a different color, orange or yellow, or get rid of them. So that was going to be my exact question.
Right.
And
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
so no, I think you hit on it. And I think it's going to take maybe approaches from two different departments looking at this to see what makes best sense, what makes best economic sense for the property owner.
And what's nice about this third party situation is we had nothing to do with it. Code enforcement, the neighborhood services, we didn't give master plan any data. We gave them nothing except the list of homes which we collaborated on to get from DCAD. So we can target red homes because we're targeting problems, not people. And so we were given this kind of blind study, right? And we can see that some homes are more in need of attention than others. And we can target those homes without any fear of, you're targeting a certain group of people or you're targeting this kind of person or that kind of person. It's like, actually, we're not targeting anyone. We didn't make the assessment, first of all, and we're just going where the reds are. And so it's helpful for code to combat the argument of you're picking on me, essentially, when it's like, actually, it wasn't code at all that did this. This was an independent study, and this is how your house came back. And so we're going to work with you to get out of that red if we can, up to a yellow or a green. So that's why these things are really, really helpful to us.
So I think one of the ways to view this might be if we use this as a baseline, then 3 years from now or whatever that time frame is, we come back and run the same study and see how colors have changed. Or maybe we see that there's a different area that has more red, something like that. But we have something. What I don't want to see is that we've done this and it gets set to the side and nothing happens. We need to use this information, but now that we have it, we need to be able to compare it to something, and how we change for the better would be whenever that next survey is.
Yes, I totally agree. And so the data, I'm a data guy, my staff unfortunately know that because I throw it in their face constantly. But the data helps focus our efforts, right? And so they've given us an abundance of data, and yeah, we're going to use it.
Okay,
So.
very good. Anything else, Dave? I thought you had your hand up.
Leo, if my numbers crunching in the real time is correct, the reds represent 335 homes. Is that? It's not on this slide, but it was in the.
It was on a different.
I might have to ask Amy. This is Amy's math. And do you have a figure on that?
I think it's on an earlier slide in this deck that was up.
Yes. 3:35.
3:35, yes.
Oh, yes, we got it.
3.8.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Right, right here. So based on your team size, that's not an insurmountable number to overcome.
No,
And so therefore, the request that I might have is how long do you think that it would take you to derive what would drive those scores from below 2.5 up into, let's go to the yellow, we'll skip over
Mhm.
the orange
Mhm.
and see if we can then get into the 2.75. How long do you think it would take your team to assess those 335 properties based on the data that you have on the scoring system that we were just described on the 12 factors?
Mhm. Well, keep in mind that, they have cases open already, right? So it's not like they're gonna drop everything and go after the 335, right? And some of that, a majority of that 335 might be in one officer's district. So it's not like it's evenly split apart. So you have one officer tackling 100 of these. Well, we have 5 officers. So a lot of that particular burden is put on that one human. So, but I mean, you're taking kind of everything into account, just kind of broadly estimating. When a code officer gets settled and comfortable in their routine, and like right now, we have several code officers that are new to us because new positions were approved, so they're still in training. But when an officer gets settled and in their routine and they're they know the law and they're applying it properly, I would expect every officer to be in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 cases a day, which is properties. Now, one property might have multiple violations on it, and of course, when they're there, they deal with everything. They don't just hone in on one thing. So if you take that math, if I can do it in my head, maybe we'll use 10 just because it's easier. So 10 officers times, 10 properties a day times 6 officers is 16. And then you're up against 335. So is that a week or so? Or, I mean, look, if they did this exclusively, if they dropped everything and did it, it would be a week. In reality, we're probably looking at a month or two to at least get eyes and cases open on all the reds. That's
2 months is reasonable.
I think that's reasonable.
To me. I'm a project person. You have to come up with a work breakdown structure. I'm not asking you to do that right now on the fly. But I think the ask here is to identify what master plan has identified and see what needs to occur and see what subsets come out of that. Things we probably already have on the radar. Let's be.
yes, could be.
So
Sure.
those are already working. So I think that's the information flow that I'd like to see. And I think my peers around the council would also like to see. And then what do we do actionable for those others?
Mhm.
What is your plan? And I would think in that 2-month time frame, you'd have the ability, and I'll look to Ben to sort of make that come to fruition.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, mine.
Earlier you mentioned that your districts for code enforcement don't match these districts.
Yes.
Do these results make you want to change that possibly? Not to match our districts,
Mhm.
but my district has the most red.
Mhm.
Does that make you want to redraw your districts to?
I would say it's something to think about. We're not fully staffed at the moment. We have one position that's open, that's posted to be filled. So we're not fully staffed. And so that's a factor. But other factors like, perhaps the district with the most red needs the most experienced officer. Perhaps that's the change we make. We don't necessarily change the districts, but we put the most experienced person over there and they know their thing. Jared in the back of the room there, our code enforcement manager, has been doing this for over 6 years. And Victor's been doing it for over 16, sitting next to him. I've been doing it for 13. So sometimes the more experienced person can move a little faster, knows how to deal with the inevitable arguments, negotiations that come with enforcement, right? So could we change the districts based on this? Sure. Can we change personnel and where they are? Sure. Can we pair up, like if we see a particular, let me see if I can pull up our map again. We have like, my eye is immediately drawn to the center of red. It looks like one or two streets, right? And so my first gut instinct is to put two officers in a truck and have them drive that whole street. Because you can have two sets of eyes looking out each side. It's harder to miss things when you've got a buddy. It just is. Two sets of eyes are better than one, right? So perhaps it's almost like a mini sweep, right? We're not going to sweep this whole district, but this string of houses, this little square here needs attention. So instead of leaving that and dumping that on one officer, perhaps we pair that officer with another one just to get some help, just to get it done, you know? And then the second officer backs away and leaves the work to the first officer to proceed. So there are options like that code will consider too. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to handle this. And personally, I'm open to all of them. So if anyone has any ideas beyond what I've said, by all means, share them.
Right. Anything else on this? Okay. Thank you, Leo. Stay up
Sure.
there.
Okay.
Next up is A4, receive a general update from Code Enforcement Division. Okay. Well, I've been asked to present you some general information and then also touch on some topics that have been of interest of late. And so this presentation will do both of those things. What I'd like to do is start with some of the processes. Most members of the public have no idea what the code enforcement process actually is. And so I'd love to share that with you and with anyone listening, so that you can see the stuff behind the scenes, okay? So what you're looking at here is the generic code enforcement process. This is about 90% of the violations that we see, and they're essentially the basics. So trash, grass, parking over the sidewalk, parking on the grass. It's just kind of that entry-level stuff, right? And this is the process that those violations follow. So of course, your officer finds the problem, which is proactive. They find it on their own, or reactive, meaning they're responding to a complaint that they receive. So one way or another, they find a problem, right? And what they do when they find the problem is issue a courtesy notice, which looks like this. It's English and Spanish, and it gets left at the house immediately. And it's okay, and it's very warm and bubbly and friendly, and says, "Hey, you probably don't know that you're breaking the rules. Can you stop that? Can you move your carts, please? Can you put your trash in the cart? Can you do those? Remove your car from the sidewalk. Just basic stuff." Okay, so that's step 2 there. And so of course the officer comes back after the 48-hour notices to see if they're successful, and a lot of them are. A lot of them are. But if the problem has not been resolved, or if all the problems checked off here have not been resolved, then we move actually into official enforcement. And that starts with the notice of violation. The notice of violation is required by state law and by city law. And we have to mail it to the owner on record with DCAT. It has to go there. Now, officers will also mail it to the house itself, because obviously, the owner might be in California. Well, we want the resident in the house to get the notice in the next day or two and cut their grass, right? So we do more than what the state law requires. And the time that folks are given in their official notices varies depending on what we're up against. Grass and weeds, 7 days. The law requires a minimum of 7 days. So grass and weeds, 7 days. Trash and debris, 7 days. These are typically things that anybody can handle. It doesn't take 7 days to move your car off the sidewalk. So it's very straightforward. But what happens when you write up someone for, needing to paint their garage door or the side of their home or fix a broken window? Some of these things can take longer periods of time. It's just reasonable to think that. So the officer may include in their notice a little bit longer time. You can have 2 weeks to repair your car. A common
a common extension justification is, can I just get to my next paycheck and I'll be able to fix my car? It's like, yeah, okay, well, your next paycheck for most of us is typically 2 weeks away. So you might start off with a 7-day notice and then someone calls for assistance and they get another week or two out of the officer, to help them move along. So, at this point in the process, usually on a monthly basis, 92 to 96% of all violations are fixed right now at this stage, which is really good. That's what we were doing in my last city, and we're doing it here, and it's great. That means people are getting their letters, whether they ask for extensions or not. They're reading them, they're looking at their pictures, they're asking for help, but they're doing it on their own, which is good. The small fraction left, that 4%, 5%, they move on to the next step, which is their 24-hour notice. This is an example of one, and you can see if you're a color person, the tone has changed a bit. There's not this friendly, bubbly font, but it's a little bit more serious font. It says, listen, we've done this, and we've sent you a letter, and you still haven't done what we need you to do. So you have 24 hours to reach out to us and work something out because, and it says here, you're about to be cited. So Jared in the back for years has called these silver bullets because if you remember, there's 4 or 5% people that haven't complied yet. This will catch 3 or 4 of them. 3 or 4% see this and go, oh, I forgot all about that. Oh, my time's up. I better call. They work really well. It's that last 1 or 2% that make it all the way to the bottom of the list. And that's when this has failed, 3 attempts have failed. And by the way, we don't limit 24-hour notices to just the door hangers. Officers are told to make some kind of attempt. Phone, email, door hanger. We can post the property too. Do something new because what you've done has been unsuccessful. And that's why there's silver bullets. Phone calls get, the code officer is actually calling me. Must be serious, So that's the 24-hour notice. So folks that don't make it past these 3 steps successfully end up in that 5th step, which is, okay, now our attempts at education have failed. And code enforcement only has 2 major tools in its box: education and enforcement. Well, when education lets us down, enforcement's the only thing left. And so that means someone's getting cited and pulled into court for their violation, and or the city is going to fix the problem if we're legally allowed to do that, and we're going to send you a bill for the work that was done. You have 30 days to pay the bill, and if you don't, it'll get leaned against your house and start accruing interest. All this is in state law. It's all covered in state law and city law. So that's kind of it from top to bottom. That's just the basic process. And again, very few make it to the end of the list, generally speaking. Important to note about this process is it doesn't restart every time a violation occurs. In a year's period, let's say you get written up for grass and weeds, and you make it through steps 1 and 2, and after you get one of these on your door, you go ahead and mow your grass. Oh, I dropped the ball. I better mow my grass. Okay. Well, then 2 months later, your grass is high again. We pick up with step 3. We do not start over with this process if the violation is the same. Okay. Because at some point, you have to satisfy, the legal requirements, and also you want to protect the city's interest. If we have to mow that lot, that notice, step number 3, is required to get our money back. You cannot get your money back and lien that property if you don't do step 3. You can't even step on the property and mow the grass without step 3. So that notice is critical. So we are not going to continue hanging door hangers after door hangers after door hangers. Obviously, that's part of where chronic offenses come from. Folks need to learn, well, the more I do this, the stiffer the penalty gets. Maybe I should stop now. Okay. So I just want to make sure you're all aware of that. This process doesn't restart every time. It picks up where it left off. Okay. This is an example, and don't worry, I won't read it all to you, but this is an example of a specific process. The state outlines specific enforcement processes for certain offenses. This is the junk vehicle process. As you can see, it's huge and includes things that the last process didn't. You have to request a court hearing. If we want to take a vehicle away, we can take that vehicle off the property. We can remove it. The city has a right to do that if you follow the steps properly. But there's a whole process to it. Can we write citations? Sure. But if you want to take a vehicle away, your notice has to be up to par. You have to go to the judge and prove the vehicle is junk. And then the judge gives the order to take the vehicle away. If you noticed here, step number 3, mailing the notice, I said the minimum is 7 days. That would be 7 days from the date on the notice, the date we drop it in the mail. This one is 10 days from the date they receive it. There are these little intricacies inside the law. This has to be mailed certified. The last one doesn't. Okay, and so there are these little caveats and these special violations that have to be respected. And one of the things that I spend a lot of time explaining to the public is, why is code enforcement taking so long? You gave me 7 days to mow my grass. Why is that truck still there? You know, and I don't blame folks for asking that question because it'd be frustrating for sure. And then we explain, listen, the process you are under is not the same as this process. Legally, we have to do all this stuff, and then we can take the car away. And usually when you take a minute to explain that to I didn't know there were different processes. I wouldn't expect you to know. That's okay. That's not your job. But we spend some time trying to explain these different things to folks. There are other specific processes. There's graffiti has its own process, 15 days instead of 10. And you have to offer to remove graffiti for free from somebody's property before we can write them up. So that's completely unique. Nothing else is like that. Dangerous buildings, tearing down a building. We're dealing with that right now. We're in the process. That involves a court hearing too. And the judge can give them more time if they meet certain conditions. That could go on for months. And so the law spells out these specific processes for certain violations, and we have to respect them. And so just want to make sure you will get kind of a feel for why some violations seem to linger and others don't. It's because sometimes of stuff like this. Okay? So that's the general stuff, just the general processes. That's what code officers are doing every day. They're mailing notices, they're finding violations. That's the basics. So specifically, some topics have come up that I wanted to touch on because I know they're of interest. The first one is easement maintenance. This has been an issue for some time. And of course, I guess just to summarize briefly, when you have two homes backing up to each other and their fences are, I don't know, 10 feet apart, well, you've got that green space in the middle. And folks seem to have trouble in some areas of town keeping that mowed. Well, in most cases, folks don't understand that that's their land. They actually own the dirt. They own that grass. And they don't know that because all they see is where their fence ends. And they think, oh, that's my property. But the truth is actually your property extends a few feet into that grass, as does your behind neighbor. And you're responsible for mowing that. And most people don't know that. Some people do and just fail to mow it anyway. So we've tried different things to try and get this resolved, especially because code enforcement can only enforce things it can see from the right of way. Well, these larger easements on these longer roads, you can stand at the end of a road and look down the easement, but at some point you lose track of which grass goes with which house, or the road curves off and you can no longer see anything further. So what can we do to help these folks? We have plenty of folks who are doing their part, plenty of them that are doing the right thing. But how do we help those folks? How do we ease the stress off those folks by educating those who don't do the right thing? So code enforcement has done some more education. We've blasted entire communities with letters. You may not know this, but that's your grass. So you need to take care of it. Just nobody's been written up. No cases were open. Just you might not know this. And it's been successful. It usually is. Usually you get a good amount of compliance. But, not everybody lives in their home forever. You know, a tenant moves out and the new tenant moves in, well, they never got the letter, so they have no idea, right? So we're up against challenges like that. Some folks just don't care. Be honest, that they just don't. That is true with all violation types. So that's again, education has failed. We use enforcement when we have to. So code enforcement has tried to do what it can legally do to go ahead and address the problem. Now, we did reach out to Encore because most of these easements are granted to Encore. And we reached out to Encore with the hope that they would share their access with us. And I'm so glad to see Kevin here today because he helped me with it.
I said I was able.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. So we asked them, you know, you're allowed to go into this easement. This easement is reserved for you when you need to use it. So can you, in some form or fashion, share that with us? And then maybe the city could investigate maintaining some of these spaces itself or using contractors, whatever. We were just trying to open some doors because access is the issue, legal access is the issue. Well, Kevin and attorneys with Encore and myself and other folks from Encore, we got together on a Zoom meeting and talked it out and then broke. And Encore came back with, I'm sorry, we can't help you. We have liability concerns that you can't alleviate us from. And we said, okay. So the Encore partnership, we tried and it just didn't pan out. They have concerns that we can't alleviate. So the other option in front of us at this time is voluntary consent. Now, we can only go on to folks' property if we have their consent to do so or a warrant. And there are some other extenuating circumstances, but those are the big two, especially in code world. You either have a warrant or you have permission. That's it. You can't step on people's dirt without those things. Well, our legal folks have drafted this, just an example, this right of entry agreement. If this is signed by the resident or the homeowner, it gives the city permission to step onto the easement. And if this particular agreement specifically says for the purpose of maintenance. So we would not, a code officer wouldn't even go back there because we don't mow grass, right? But we could, in theory, the city would now have permission to go back there and if we wanted to mow, trim, and so on. So that's where we are now is the idea of obtaining voluntary consent. That comes with its own own quandaries that need to be considered. Okay, let's say that the city decides that, you know what, we will take care of some of these easements. It's a problem, folks are complaining, we will take care of some of these. Okay, the first question is who will take care of them? Is it contractors or staff? And where will the funding for that work come from? Because this is something entirely new. The other question is when one block finds out that you're mowing their easement, this easement, but not mine, what is your response to that going to be? I got cited for not mowing my easement, but you're mowing their easement? That doesn't seem fair, someone might say. How do you respond to that? How do we decide who's going to get mowed and who doesn't? So those are kind of pitfalls to this voluntary consent notion. Not saying they're insurmountable, but I am saying that they're worth thinking about. So that's where we are now with respect to easement maintenance, okay? Allocating enforcement resources, I mean, we actually had some good discussion about this already, so I'll try not to belabor it, but using different tools, we decide how code enforcement resources should be used. Where do we put officers and why? Right? Well, as we can see from the map that Amy's team provided, this area has an awful lot of green in it. And this area has an awful lot of green in it. These places are doing pretty well, whereas that's a street with an awful lot of red. So perhaps it's wise that the officer in this district not visit this neighborhood every week. Maybe that's not necessary. Maybe once every 2 weeks will do, so that they can spend more time over here. Stuff like that. I'm not saying that's the solution in every case, but I'm saying use your time where you can do the most work. There's also other things, not just this, this map, but there are other things, the officers' own observations. Some officers have been in their districts for a bit and they've gotten to know them. They've gotten to know the people. They've seen some things decline. They've seen some things improve. And officers will come to Jared or I and say, hey, something's happening and I'm not sure I can handle it. Can I get some help? Can I get a buddy? Yeah, we can totally do that. So officers will speak up if they see something unusual going on. Residents, of course, and yourselves, the feedback that we hear, in fact, a lot of the residents' feedback come through you too. But that kind of thing, there's a lot of broken fences in my neighborhood and, there's a lot of broken driveways in my neighborhood. Okay, that's good to know. Let's see what cases we have open already, because we may. And then if we don't, let's see which ones need to be open. Okay. And then, of course, you have regulatory changes. Those would be the state, and some of our own laws change over time too. So what will the state allow us to address and how long will it take? And, our own laws, what do we decide to change? And what do we decide to allow and not allow? Okay, we've done plenty of changes in my time here over the past 2.5 years. So all of this is taken into consideration when we decide which officers to put where and what we ask them to focus on. Okay. Now, a topic has come up about single-family properties, and I wanted to run through this quickly because we have gotten a number of complaints and comments about some bad renters. And these folks, when I hear the phrase bad renters, I think, okay, a rental house with habitual problems, and obviously it's getting on the neighbor's nerves, or the community, that neighborhood's nerves. So what do we do about those? Well, it's important to remember that some violations are the responsibility of the tenant and some are not. Some are the responsibility of the owner. You would not expect a tenant to repair a roof or a fence or even put house numbers on their house. It's not their house, it's not their roof. When they move out, they're not going to take the roof with them. That's a homeowner thing. And so those are the kinds of things we direct at the homeowner. The immediate issues, the things that the tenant most likely created, the trash and the outside storage and not mowing the grass, those are the things that a tenant is responsible for, okay? And then, of course, the owners are responsible for having COs and rental licenses. Someone mentioned those earlier. And a lot of owners don't realize this, but it's the last sentence at the bottom. Ultimately, owners are responsible for everything, every single thing that happens on a property. So if you rented out your home here and you live in California, you can get cited for your tenant failing to mow his grass. That can happen, totally happen. It's your house that's going to get liened if we have to mow it. So, but some folks don't realize that. Some owners, kind of have that out of sight, out of mind attitude that, oh, it's a rental property. I'm over here. They'll take care of it, even though they're getting the same notices that the tenant's getting. They'll be fine. They'll take care of it. It's like, oh, you got to keep an eye on your tenants sometimes, right? That's your responsibility. You own a home here. I can appreciate that it's not your home, like your actual home, but you do have to keep an eye on it. Okay. So how are we handling these kind of chronic rental issues that seem to be getting so much attention? Well, we've started increasing education on every topic code enforcement has. Actually, it was pretty great. The officers themselves came up with educational material. So every notice that we mail out has a list of frequent violations and instructions to avoid them. That's one of those things that you stick on your fridge, right? And you just leave it there. And am I supposed to be putting out my carts today? No, not yet. Not until the day before, right? When's bulk day again? First full week of the month, not the first week where the first day appears, right? Stuff like that. That stuff is going out in every notice. Even if that particular information doesn't apply to your situation, we're still sharing it with them. One of the other officers who's not here today, Brittany, she drafted an entire English and Spanish document explaining bulk day because her district has so many issues with folks misunderstanding the rules. So everybody's getting that every time. So that's what we're trying to do. That's one example of what we're trying to do to increase education. Take every interaction as a chance to teach somebody something and prevent a problem from ever occurring. But there are other things we can do too. stricter enforcement for certain violations. We can issue citations immediately for health and safety violations, like trash is a good example. We don't do that immediately as a practice because, as I said earlier, the notice is an educational document. We want to teach them what they're doing wrong to change their behavior. But also, if we have to clean up that trash, we want to be able to bill you for it. And you can't do it without the notice. Okay, so we have on occasion issued citations directly for very serious health scenarios, health violations, but it's not standard for us. But code is considering it now. We are considering, you know what, some of these folks have been educated many times, or these neighborhoods have been educated many times. It might take a firmer hand. It might just take a firmer hand to go, you know what, it doesn't seem to be permeating for whatever reason. And so, you know what, maybe on some occasions, which we would come up with, you know, in an objective list, we're going to issue citations right away, immediately, and let that permeate the neighborhood. Oh, don't put that out. I got cited for that. Don't do it. Neighbors talk to each other and warn each other. We know that. I'm not a fan of that practice, but I'll admit it is necessary sometimes. And so, especially in our town, in certain areas where bulk trash seems to be such a challenge for some people, a firmer hand may be necessary. On the other hand, chronic offenders, I have no problem being firm with ever. Ben has heard me make the comments, and it's totally true, that I don't think chronic offenders are worth the stamps that we put on notices. I don't. When you're a chronic offender, you have told me that you don't care about your neighbors, your community. You've been educated multiple times, and you continue to offend over and over and over. I've given up on you. There are people that need code officers. They need their help. They need their guidance. You obviously don't want it. So we're just going to go ahead and go to that bottom of the list. And if I have to cite you multiple times, we will, and until you get the gist of it. And I'll tell you, there is a property right now that we're dealing with. We've been dealing with for several months. It was a nightmare. I've actually got pictures of it. It was a nightmare. It got cleaned up temporarily and then became an even bigger nightmare. We've cited the owner and the tenant more than 20 times. And they've done nothing. Nothing. I got pictures of it. I'll show you if you'd like to see it. Their attorney came to court and essentially said, yeah, that's a problem. Their own attorney is acknowledging the chaos they're creating, and nothing has been done. So what does that mean? That means we have to go out and clean this property at taxpayers' expense, and then bill back the owner and lien the house, all because one or two people simply refuse to just fall in line. It's not that hard, but that's some people. And then meanwhile, those neighbors are complaining to code enforcement, and I don't blame them. Why aren't you doing something? Why is it going on for so long? Why aren't you doing something? Actually, we are. You just can't see it because they're not cooperating. But we've done an awful lot, and they're not budging. So in the world of chronic offenders, I give no mercy to any of them. I really don't. And then, of course, you have disengaged owners and property managers, those folks that rent a home and then walk away. They collect their rent check and never acknowledge the responsibility they still have. You have a responsibility to keep an eye on your home and your tenants, or else you can be pulled into this. I need you to be more engaged with us. When you get a notice in the mail from code enforcement, I know it's not your problem to cut the grass, but did you call your tenant and tell them you got the notice and you want them to deal with it? Because that notice says the owner's home is going to be liened if you don't take care of it. We have owners that simply are not engaged. Some are local, some are not. But I've rented the house. I'm getting my check every month, and that's the attitude some have taken. That doesn't help code efforts at all. So the officers have been told to hold extension requests to a higher standard. There are some things that frankly do justify extensions and some don't. I mentioned one earlier. It doesn't take 7 days to move a car off a sidewalk. It doesn't. It doesn't take 7 days to move carts from the street to the side of your house. Can I have an extension to do some of these things? The reason you give me is going to have to be pretty good, pretty good. Other things are justifiable, right? Fixing a fence, fixing a car, fixing a roof. Those are major expenses and we get that. And so we can work with you on that. But the officers have been told, okay, I want you to rein in if you're given extensions loosey goosey, and I don't think any of them really are, but if you are, I want you to rein it in. I want to hear valid explanations for why things weren't done on time. And then go ahead and work with those folks. Okay, Leo. Okay, good. So we're getting a little bit stricter with the extension policy. More collaboration with other departments. Bulk trash is a perfect example. We do collaborate with solid waste and Shane's team to have bulk trash addressed. When we find bulk trash violations, we notify the sustainability assistant, and it gets put on the special pickup list, and we try to get rid of those things as soon as possible. What I would like to see more of personally is code enforcement only has 7 or 8 pairs of eyes, but the city, this organization, has quite a bit more. And I would like other department employees to feel comfortable reporting what they see to us. If they spot something out there that doesn't look right, that doesn't look safe, I want them to feel okay speaking up. And so I'd like to work with the directors moving forward to encourage that. We don't have to wait for folks to complain. Some of these things we might already be addressing, and that's okay. But I'd still love to hear from other staff that are out there, like meter readers and these folks, public works employees are always great because they always seem to find stuff, and so because they're just on every street all the time. So that's an example of what I'd like to do in the future, is to help code enforcement and other staff communicate about what they see. And then the last thing on this list is the 3-strike rule. This is a specific question I received, which was the short-term rental program has a 3-strike rule in it. And what it says is, if you have 3 violations, I believe in a year, and those violations are a direct result of you running your short-term rental, then code enforcement can revoke your license. And so the question I received was, can we do that for single-family rentals? And the answer is yes, we can. In fact, there's already language in the single-family rental article to do that. It's already there. But there are, again, some things to keep in mind. We can revoke your license and your certificate of occupancy. We can go that far. In fact, the code even says we can shut off your electricity after we do that. So we can do those things. But what we cannot do is force a particular tenant to leave. The city does not have the authority to say that tenant has to go because they keep breaking the law. It is the right of every property owner in Texas to rent their home. And so we can cite them for not having a license, we can cite them for not having a CO, but we can't make the person leave. And in our world, in the world of code enforcement, it's the behavior of that person that is causing the issue, right? So can we do that? Can we revoke licenses? Yeah. Can we revoke COs? Yes. But if the train of thought is, well, can we make certain tenants leave because they're just not getting it? No, we can't go that far. So.
Leo, quick question, if
Yes.
you don't mind. You mentioned a case where the homeowner clearly is not going to do anything, or the renter's not doing anything about their property.
Mhm.
Their own attorney said it's a problem.
Mhm.
If we have this 3-strike rule in our single family ordinance, have we not turned off their electricity?
We haven't yet because they fixed the first violation voluntarily. So they were written up and then they fixed the issue. It took some time, but they did. This new issue that has appeared is where they've dug their heels in. And the fact that they've got an attorney, that their attorney is participating in the court process, kind of puts a hold on things. It doesn't have to, it's not official, there's no rule that says I have to stop. But it's respect for the court process and that they're participating in it. What I foresee is that if this problem does not go away in short order, the next time we have the attorney in court, we will tell the attorney, we're about to turn off your client's electricity. So I suggest you chat with them. So that's where I see that going.
Thank you.
Sure. And then I believe this is lastly, or second to lastly, RV parking regulations. This hasn't come up directly, but it has been mentioned in the past, but it has never really been discussed. So I threw it out here in today's presentation just to see if there was any interest in further discussion or research on this topic. I've included some examples from other cities. I've actually contacted 17 other cities. I have the whole list right here. I just threw up 4 to give you a feel for what other cities are doing. But this is here mainly to see if there's any interest in pursuing this topic. Some cities are very lenient. You know, you can park it anywhere as long as it's on an improved surface. Other cities are very strict, like Midlothian is by far the strictest I've seen. I think not only must it be on an improved surface, but it must also be screened. And that was the strictest thing I've heard of. Sir, did you have a question?
So this is something that we're going to have further discussion on, this particular item. It was brought up once before by residents over a year ago, and it was on the future agenda items list for it does need to be addressed. And I want to give both sides the opportunity to provide their input and weigh in on that. So at some point in the very near future, we will have discussion on that, whether that be through town hall meetings to at least get the ball rolling or some other method of conference.
Okay. Then just so you know, I've done the research so far, so that's available. And again, this is just food for thought. That's all it is today.
Sure.
That's that. Weekend patrols are back for code enforcement. Code officers are out. A code officer is out on Saturdays for 4 hours, looking at certain hot topic items. Garage sales are big, obviously, this time of year. Work without a permit, you can sometimes catch that on the weekends. Extreme violations, if a code officer on the weekend drives by and sees one of those, you know, oh my gosh, violations, you know, that we need to deal with that right now. It doesn't matter whose district it's in. If they spot it, they're going to deal with it. Shopping carts, kind of a minor thing, but we're still watching those. We're still collecting them. That's a if you were paying attention last year, Walmart is leaving abandoned carts in various areas around town. So the weekend officers will keep an eye out for those as well. But weekend enforcement is back, and if there are any questions about that, I'm happy to answer those. The last slide is a plug again for the app. The app has been really successful. Folks seem to like it, but I just want to remind everyone that when you use the app to report what you see, your violation is routed directly to the officer whose area it belongs in. That is the fastest way to get somebody to address a problem. Folks are always welcome to call or email code enforcement and file a complaint. There's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, it might be in a couple of hours before the admin gets that into the system. Well, if you are comfortable using the app and you get it in the system, it goes right to the officer. They can, in some cases, visit it the same day. Most of our complaints are addressed and the issues in the app resolved in under 2 days.
So Leo,
Yes.
Just for the benefit of everybody, including those that may be listening at some point, is personal information of the reporter kept confidential?
Yes, the state protects the identity of code complainants. The state sees them as, the language actually said, they're seen as informants. Yeah, of a crime, you know, like you know, what is it, Special Victims Unit or something, like an informant. So they're protected. The only real exemption to that exception is if you're using the app and you allow your information to be visible to the public. That is a choice that you can make when you're filing a complaint. So just make sure that you don't, if you want yourself to be private, that you set it that way.
Well, shouldn't the default be that your information is private?
Yes, it is. And on our side, it is. But last time I checked, because this had come up, and I think I spoke about it in a council meeting several months ago, but one of the settings which we cannot control was a default for some public information. And I remember Mark and I talking about it briefly but it's been several months. But there was one setting that we asked the company, can you change that to a default or private? And they said, no, that's not an option at this time.
What was their explanation?
Mark, do you happen to remember? I think it's just, I don't, we're not the only city that uses the product, so, they're constantly updating and changing things.
Right, everybody wants something a little different. Every city wants to handle things a little differently. So to kind of meet all the needs is probably a challenge, but our pushback would be that why can't it be a toggle on or off for us? So that's a feature request in their world. So we can ask for that feature to be added, but it's really up to the developer to do that.
Yes, we should do everything we can to make sure.
Yeah, it never leaves the code office, not ever.
I can't imagine that they've made an app that has lots of things that are specific to Farms Ranch. You're talking about
Correct. It's, yeah,
an
exactly.
hour of coding. I can't imagine that that's not something that could change in a day.
The setting is there for the user to toggle.
I understand.
themselves.
And they had to decide with their code to make it, you're gonna be public.
Understand.
It should be the other way. And it can't, I mean, that,
You have to register yourself, so,
I understand.
and it's, so you're providing that information. I
Yeah,
understand.
I don't believe what they're saying.
I guess it's also worth remembering too, that this company, this product is in other states. So other states have other rules about, the state of Texas protects the identity of code complainants, but perhaps other states do not. And perhaps this feature that they have is somehow in line with another state, that's possible. I guess just to play devil's advocate, but I agree with you entirely. It would be nice just to default that button over. So yeah, so.
Just one quick, I just want to make sure the council understands as well as the public understands. While everything Leo has said is absolutely correct, if there should come a point that we actually end up with one of these citations complaints having to be adjudicated in municipal court, we may be required to bring those complainants forward to provide the sufficient evidence and testimony, at which time obviously they will not be, they will be known publicly who they are. They will know, so, we can't do judicial, trials, as anonymously, at least certainly not at a Class C misdemeanor level.
No,
So as long as everybody understands that, but yes, correct. Informant confidentiality is protected and is an exemption that's been stated for 40 years under the Open Public Information Act.
Are you saying that if that happened, you would go to the person who would ask them first?
Everyone, you almost have to, because everyone, Leo and anybody, folks in the room who've done municipal court prosecutions, obviously at some point you've got to have a witness. Sure. Because the code enforcement people are not always there at the time when the offense occurs. You've got to rely on the eyewitness, otherwise it's hearsay evidence, which is inadmissible. So therefore, you've got to have that eyewitness who's going to most likely be the complainant, providing a testimony. Obviously, if that complainant ultimately is not willing to step forward, should the case go to the length of actually going to trial, then it's just like a police officer not, unable to show up for a case.
That's not where I was going. I was going, Omar turns me in, we're neighbors.
Right.
He doesn't want me to know that he turned me in.
Which is pretty typical.
If you want to take me to court, can you, without his authority, or can the city without his authority, release the information that Omar turned me in?
It's going to,
I guess, let me just stop here.
Yeah.
If that is the case, then that should be in the app. There should be something that says, click here
but I think almost anybody in any city attorney's office, code enforcement, police department, anybody will tell you, we certainly, arguably we could, but we don't, because doing so would create a huge chilling effect on getting voluntary complaints that hopefully we can follow up and have sufficient evidence. If we can, we'll prosecute it without that person's testimony. Ultimately.
Right now, the residents with the app.
Yeah.
They click on that because it says, click here to keep your information private.
Right.
There's an assumption by the resident that it will always be private.
Yeah. Now, obviously, it can't be private to the city. Sure. But it's gotta be private, visible to third parties.
That's all.
Yes, and
I'm
that's
just trying to
really,
protect
and
the
that makes
residents.
perfect sense, absolutely perfect sense. Put it.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna ask a couple quick things. One, Leo, do we have a number? Do you have a number of the rental properties in the city? And you don't have to give it to me now.
I've got it for you.
How-
I ran a report before I came.
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
How do we get owners to register if they're going to be renting their property, whether it be long-term or short-term?
Mhm.
And then, are we sure that all homes that are listed on Airbnb or other sites, similar sites are registered?
First question, was it single family rentals? How many? I ran a report before I came in today and we had 770, 765 plus 17, what is it, 82? 82, 782. So 782, there were 17 applications waiting. So there were 782 registered rental properties. There are probably more that are unregistered and we catch those as we can.
Okay.
So second question was, how do we get them registered? Is that right? A large part of the ones that are caught, not that people are doing anything wrong, but are doing the CO during the CO process.
Okay.
When ownership of a home changes, code enforcement goes and inspects the home to make sure it's safe and then releases the utilities to be turned on. Well, during that interaction, the code officer will ask, do you plan on living here or renting this home? And folks will say, oh, I'm going to rent it out. And okay, well, here's a rental application. You need to do this or that. So the education starts right off the bat. Anyone who, of course, doesn't do it voluntarily, we either find along the way or sometimes complaints come in. But yeah, the beginning of the process, if it worked perfectly for everyone, would be the CO process when you bought your home.
Okay.
Okay.
And last question was regarding homes that are listed on rental sites.
Yes.
Do we actively?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we pay a third party service to monitor them. It's called Host Compliance. And Host Compliance finds them, tracks them, collects taxes, issues the licenses for us currently. We have a third party that does that. I actually just audited everything that Host Compliance did a few weeks ago. We found several that were not registered. I think we probably got a record amount registered in the last month than in the time I've been here, maybe 8 or 10, but we found them and everybody's complied, everybody's signed up. They have to pay their taxes every month, and so Host Compliance helps with that too. So yeah, we do keep an eye on those folks too.
Okay. That's all I have. Anybody else have anything for Leo?
Multiple cars parked out in driveways and on the streets. How do you guys handle that?
Well, you're limited to 5, right, at a residential property. So if you're over 5, it's just that generic process that we talked about in the front. Cars on the street are not part of that count at all, because I could drive over to your house and park in front of your house at any time, right? So they are not part of the count. So 5 visible vehicles on the property is the limit. Anything more than that, and we'll just write them up with the standard process. Okay.
All righty. Leo, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll get this next item in real quick, which is A5, discuss 3 new policies that are petition for traffic calming measures, stop sign addition or illumination, and traffic signal addition or removal.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm Ryan Sauter, Director of Public Works. I know this is not going to be as exciting as water and sewer, but it is a close second. And why is it not popping up on the screen? All right, there we go. All right, before we get into this, I'm going to give you a little short disclaimer. You bet. I can fly through this one. Just so you know, we are talking about traffic measures, these 3 policies. Anytime we discuss traffic measures, anything that affects traffic or the flow of traffic or pedestrians, we will have to conduct some type of study. And that study is going to require us to consult a traffic engineer. We do not employ a traffic engineer in-house. We're a small public works department. Most of our stuff is pointed towards the civil side, civil infrastructure. All right, moving forward. This is how most of this has come up over the last couple of years. We've received a increase in public requests for additional stop signs, additional traffic signals, signal removals, and illumination of stop signs. We've had an increase in police call volume for more enforcement. Through that, we've conducted additional research on incoming requests, trying to find solutions to address the issues as they come forward. And in doing so, we've determined the best way to handle this is to develop some additional policies, some guidelines for everybody to follow. All right, these are the 3 policies we're talking about today. Traffic calming, which includes road humps and speed strips. Stop signs, which include the standard and illuminated. Traffic signals, whether we're adding a signalized intersection or removing a signalized intersection. And for each one of these particular policies, we've created a process of petition. These petitions should have been attached into your packets for you to review. You notice that a lot of the information was pretty similar in all 3 petitions. We did that to try to standardize everything as much as possible, so we didn't have different criteria for different locations within the city. It would be very difficult to track all that. It would be very difficult to assist petitioners with that information too. So standard process, request is submitted to Public Works by the Citizen Project Coordinator. The Citizen Project Coordinator will then be the primary contact point for city staff. They will assist in communicating updates to the impacted residents and be responsible for collecting any required petitions or signatures. As the petitions come forward, we as the city from Public Works, we will perform an internal study. We will look at the petition and what they're asking for. We will look at accident reports, citation history, and observe traffic patterns to determine whether or not there's a need there. If through our investigation we determine that there is a safety issue that we need to address, at that point, we will consult a traffic engineer. In doing so, we will be part of that traffic engineer consulting package would include a warrant study for, depending on what we're doing, traffic signals or stop signs, pedestrian crossings, whatnot. We would have a warrant study initiated. We would also present council with the project for funding and approval. Because the warrant study for traffic signals is quite substantial. For stop signs, it would be a simple warrant study, which is much more cost effective, but still an unbudgeted item. And traffic calming measures, some traffic calming situations can be handled in-house, but there are still some warrant studies that would have to be performed as far as pedestrian access and first responder access within neighborhoods. And as you can see here, we've got a cost analysis sheet for the financial impact for each one of these studies and the implementation of the traffic calming measure. That's quick.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask a question.
You bet. Let's hit the discussion side of it.
Okay, so I was curious, does PD ever initiate requests based on their observations for like stop signs or signals to adjust their field reports? You know, they know where stuff's happening.
Yes.
So
we don't normally get additional traffic calming measure requests from PD. Their primary focus is normally on enforcement, which Chief McCoy can attest to that. But as far as finding or searching for a need for additional measures, it normally doesn't come from PD. Normally that's an inquiry that comes from outside general public, somebody that's more often than not, they're curious. Can we do something here? Is there a need for something here? One case in point, I was recently presented with a subject for, this is Southern Pines Webb Chapel traffic signal. That was a concern that was addressed or sent to me since the old school is gone. McLaughlin is still open right there. It's within 500 feet of that signal. That signal, after I really dug into it, has come up with some interesting issues. It is actually controlled by the cabinet at Fike Road. So whatever the signal at Fike does, Southern Pines does. That's an interesting situation. Never had that one before, but we discovered that today. At that particular location, I have actually reached out to a traffic engineer. I have access to one right now. So I reached out to them. They're going to look at it real quick just to see what the options are there. Do we need to add another cabinet to make that signalized intersection stand alone? Is that signal still required based on current traffic studies and what we have available to us? And is that a location that could be an illuminated crosswalk with it being a major intersection? I don't have all those answers right now, but we are looking into that just because of the complexity of those two locations together.
Okay. Councilman
Yes, so I've got some questions. So let me just make sure I understand from a very high level the process. So resident reaches out to you, says, I'd like for the city to look into potentially adding one of these three things.
Yes.
You guys then will spend the time, resources to conduct a study, determine whether it's needed. If it's needed, the resident then will begin the petition at that point.
Correct.
Okay. And then after that, then if enough signatures are received, then it will become something that will be brought forth.
It is then moved into a project where we can look into it further and determine what the warrant study cost would be for that implementation. Once we've got that project and the financial side of it established, we would then bring it to council for approval, depending on the cost and the expenditure or what we're required. We would then bring it to council for approval.
Okay.
And once council was okay with it, we would start the implementation of the study.
Sounds good. So from the time that, is there a specific time limit for the resident to collect signatures?
We did not establish a time frame or a time limit for that. We probably should address something like that, and we can put that in there. And I'm glad you brought that up. I really never even considered the time frame.
Yeah, just
we
that
could
it's
do
not
like
an
a 60
outstanding.
day.
Yeah, just so it's not an outstanding item for years.
Right.
So
Luckily, these, just so you know, we are presenting these for questions and answers today. They will come to council for approval next meeting. So we do have time to make those adjustments.
yeah, I think maybe a quarter, so 3 months might
90
be
day.
90 days, unless someone else has any other thoughts on that. That's just my thinking. So just my experience in handling petitions when I lived in Garland, it actually was a very well thought out process because once I told them what I was going to be doing and they said, you need a petition, I said, okay, well, tell me how to do it. They sent me a letter and they said, here's what you'll need to do. Here's the number of signatures that you'll need to get. And it wasn't just the number of signatures, but it also incorporated lot size. So either let's say there were 20 homes on that street that I needed to get signatures from, either I can get the majority of the people or I can get the majority of the lot sizes. So maybe there's a lot that's much larger because they'd be more affected because their lot is bigger. I suppose that was the thinking. I thought that was appropriate then. And not only that, but they also included the list. They said, here's the owner and here's the address, so that I had all of the information of everybody who needed to sign it. So that way there wasn't any confusion. And then lastly, they also issued a letter to all of the residents who would require their signature to move this petition forward, to let them know that, hey, one of your neighbors has initiated a petition to do XYZ. you may be receiving either a phone call or a knock on the door or from that individual to try and get your signature or support for this petition. And so I thought that was a real effective way to aid the resident and make sure that they had all the tools necessary to be able to be successful. So that's something that I'd like to see happen. And I mean, that's all I've got. So I'll let that sink in for the other council members in case they have a similar or differing opinion. Anybody? Dave?
I do, Mayor. Ryan, thank you. If you go back to the policies slide, I think it's like the third one. Right here. There you go.
Okay.
Wherein this could, solar powered your speed is signs, you know, the permanent ones, not the ones on the trailer, but when you drive down, I think it's Mockingbird through Highland Park, University Park and areas, I notice they have these illuminated signs that will tell you what your speed is, and below that it tells you what the speed limit is.
We are working on a separate overall standard and policy. That's where that would fall in. It did not make it into this list, but we are working on an additional policy for overall sign standards.
Okay, so that would be also no truck signs.
It would be an all-inclusive. It would include everything except for, right now, we already have a no parking policy. So that policy is going to stand alone. It would not include the no parking signs, but it would be a standard for additional signs, anything that is not traffic enforcement, such as stop signs or yield signs. So any informative type of sign, such as that, is what that policy will cover.
Okay.
And I can certainly include those illuminated LED speed signature signs.
Yeah, I think that's something we should look into.
Okay.
I don't know what the effectiveness of them is, but it's an option I think that we can use here.
There are quite a few studies out there associated with those signs that we can look at too.
Okay, great, thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Brian, thanks for the presentation. I think inside the procedures and the processes, there may be a number of kind of definitions and terms that might need to be explained.
Okay.
So you might look at that opportunity. For example, I'm just going to use this one, which is in the traffic calming petition. It talks about the 85th percentile speed shall be 5 miles per hour or greater than the posted speed. You're going to have to give the reader a little more detail, because above that you say the minimum volume of 500 vehicles per day. So you're going to have to do the math at that particular time.
And we can break that down. We can add a glossary and index for definitions and whatnot. Maybe towards the top side or very bottom side.
As long as it's included, those definitions, as somebody
We can break those down so that people can understand a little bit.
And then I think along the lines, and Omar, I think your suggestion about how the process of petitioning goes is well discussed, and we need to incorporate that. You might need to put together in this supplemental document of the procedure what the phases are of that particular. You're going to get your application, you're going to get the study, you're going to have to synopsize that for the reader in 10 steps, if you will. And I'm just being facetious if that's the number. But you have to understand that it may get hung up in some of those from a budgetary standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, et cetera. So you're trying to manage the expectation. I put that in much to the point of timeframes. This could last a while before it could come to fruition. And I think you need to manage that expectation in the document itself going forward. Just a recommendation. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I have one more, and David kind of reminded me of this. In that traffic calming process, the minimum traffic volume of 500 vehicles per day, I realize was taken from some standard.
It is, so some of them use 1,000 vehicles a day for minor streets for larger cities. Some use 300 vehicles a day. So we kind of broke down into the median standards in cities that are similar size to ours. And we went with the 500 because that seemed to be the mean of the two. And it seemed to be manageable so that we didn't end up with multiple standards for multiple areas.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where the 500 come from or originated.
I've been seeing some language in it that gives us a little bit of flexibility with that number. Because just because you don't have 500 cars going down a residential street a day doesn't mean you don't have some kind of traffic issue, like speeding or trucks or that kind of thing. So if there's a way to draft that so that we're not stuck to just a 500 minimum,
You don't want it to cut off just because you don't see 500 cars today.
we still have a problem.
Right.
Right? That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan.
Yes, sir.
Next is A6, discuss future agenda items. I have several things. One, this is just bringing up food for thought. I would like to get your opinion, have you study more about moving study session to 4 o'clock and council to 7, just so we can be more respectful of people's work day. We've already made a change. It'll take place at the next meeting, removing state of the city and replacing with report on study session items. So that is going to move forward. And then one thing I wanted to say, it sort of ties in with presentations that we heard earlier, was the consideration of a yard of the month per council district. And coming up with some type of little biddy for that. Go ahead. Councilman Barrett?
Yes, so I was looking at the future agenda items list and there were 2 items that I had put on there that I didn't see on there anymore. I wanted to make sure they were back on. So first was the rezoning in the southwest corner of Luna and Valley View, just to kind of have a discussion about that. Second was the home renovation or converted garages discussion. And then the third item that I'd like on there, which is new, is amending the noise ordinance to include objective criteria in determining when a resident is in violation. And that's it for me.
Yes.
Okay.
No additions this time, Mayor.
Councilman Barrett?
No addition.
All righty. Thank you very much for that. With that, we will recess until 6 o'clock. Recess at 5:10.